So it is the end of Pride and Prejudice, and Mr. Darcy looks at Elizabeth and says, "You are too generous to trifle with me. If your feelings are still what they were last April, tell me so at once. My affections and wishes are unchanged." And of course, we know that Elizabeth lets him know that her feelings have changed and she wants to marry him, and they're gonna get married and it's gonna be so awesome. But first, they need to sign the Regency equivalent of a prenup. Before the Darcy-Elizabeth wedding can go down, her family and Mr. Darcy need to hash out the legal terms when it comes to money in something the Regency era called a marriage settlement. And we're going to be going into what a marriage settlement was, why it existed, how it worked, and yeah, all those great details in today's video, so definitely stay tuned for that. So first up, we need to really understand how women's property and money and ownership was dealt with at the time legally. So if you've seen my video about are the Bennets actually poor, then you know that usually wealthy families gave their daughters either money or land or a combination of both when they went into a marriage. So these things can be called dowries, portions, fortunes. There's a lot of different terms that explain this concept. But the thing is, in the English common law system, the second that a girl got married, everything she owned now belonged to her husband. In the eyes of the law, a husband and a wife became one person, and legally that one person was the husband. The husband had all the rights. A woman couldn't even ever sue her husband because technically, since he was the legal entity in their marriage, he would have to sue himself. And so a woman really did lose her legal standing in the eyes of the law and her ability to own property in the eyes of the law upon marriage. Now, money and physical objects were handled slightly differently from land. Any money and physical objects a woman owned, whether this was money invested in stocks, actual cash lying around, her own clothing, that all instantly became her husband's to do 100% whatever he wanted with it. He could take it all, he could squander it all, he could sell her clothes off her back if he wanted to because he owned them outright. Now, if she owned land, upon marriage, it became his, but it had the string attached to it that upon his death, it would revert back to her. So she still kind of owned it if he died, but otherwise, during his lifetime, he would have any income that land generated. He would be able to farm it if he wanted to, say who gets to live there, etc. And a husband automatically owned anything that his wife acquired during their marriage. So for example, if she becomes a famous authoress and sells her novels and earns all these royalties off of them, those royalties legally belong to her husband. Any wages she owned, if she works in a factory, they are automatically his. So this is how women's property is handled under the English common law system. So if we go back to wealthy families who give their daughters these fortunes and they're going to get married, of course, the parents don't want this fortune to be immediately out of their control and out of their daughter's control. Because it's like, what if she's marrying a fortune hunter and he's going to instantly squander all of that money, leaving nothing to help support their daughter or their future grandchildren? So what they started to do was establish something called marriage settlements. These were the prenups of the Regency era world, and they would essentially establish controls, limits, boundaries, and uses for the money that was being brought into a marriage before the marriage actually took place. And so, of course, these contracts would effectively limit the husband's ability to use or misuse the funds the girl brought into marriage. Sponsorship Ellie here! So before we delve into the details of negotiating a marriage settlement, I just wanted to have a quick message about this video's sponsor, Skillshare. So Skillshare is an online learning community that has thousands of classes on so many different topics that can help you take your skills, whether you are a beginner or more advanced, to the next level. They have classes on art, vlogging, music, creative writing. I know a lot of you guys out there love writing in our community. Skillshare has definitely been essential in my personal art journey. Years ago, I used to think I had zero artistic talent, which I mean, how much artistic talent I have is still questionable. but I decided to learn how to draw and paint, and one of the classes that helped me the most was a Skillshare class called Drawing and Painting Portraits, A Guide for Artists by Gabrielle Brickley. This helped me learn so much about art, drawing faces, and of course using Procreate. The great thing about Skillshare is they are always adding new premium classes, and there are no ads so that you can learn uninterrupted. And also, for all of you that watch my videos with Spanish subtitles, they have Spanish subtitles too. They have Spanish, Portuguese, French, and German. So if you speak any of those languages, definitely check it out. So the first 1,000 of my subscribers who click the link in the description below will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare so that you can start exploring your creativity today. Now, back to Darcy, Elizabeth, and marriage settlements. So, for example, with Darcy and Elizabeth, after they agree to marry each other and then Darcy goes, he asks Mr. Bennet for permission. One of the next important steps that families at this stage would take is they would go into marriage settlement negotiations. So usually would be the bride's family and the groom's family, and in this case both of Mr. Darcy's parents are dead, so it would be Mr. Darcy and probably Mr. Bennet hashing out the terms of a marriage settlement. And of course every marriage settlement was built specifically for the circumstances of the people going into it. And during the negotiations of a marriage settlement, things could get very tense because of course both families are trying to get the most out of it for their own particular concerns. In fact, some engagements had to be called off because their families could not agree on the terms of a marriage settlement. So young love was just getting crushed by financial negotiations. So what would be these terms that they were hashing out for these marriage settlements? One of the biggest ones is how the money the girl's bringing in is going to be used during their lifetimes. So for example, with Elizabeth Bennet, she's bringing in like £1,000. Okay, that's not very much. But let's imagine when, Georgiana Darcy. So Georgiana Darcy has £30,000 going into marriage, and that is a fortune her family would definitely want to protect. So when Georgiana gets married, the question would become how much would be available for her husband's use. So for example, to help them maintain a comfortable lifestyle, for him to be able to spend it on new carriages, etc. And how much of this would be put into a trust fund for Georgiana, creating a separate estate, or essentially money that he can't touch, and has trustees set up around it to protect it for her and for her future children. And of course, while negotiating this, the groom's family wants him to have access to more of the money. The bride's family would probably like it if he had access to less of the money. And that was one of those terms that they would have to hash out between them. Editing Ellie here, just wanting to pop in and add an important note that a family could give their daughter additional resources after she was married. The way they would want to protect that is by putting it in a trust fund. So it would already be in a trust fund or a separate estate when they gave it to her. So that was another option for families at the time, but still they would definitely want to make a marriage settlement to protect anything she already had, and also to provide for all these different aspects we're about to go into too. And another major issue that would be included in a marriage settlement is something called pin money. And we see that actually talked about in Pride and Prejudice. When Lizzy tells her mom she's marrying Mr. Darcy, Mrs. Bennet gets so excited and she says this: "Oh, my sweetest Lizzy, how rich and how great you will be! What pin money, what jewels, what carriages you will have!" So, have you ever wondered what this pin money is? Well, basically, it was an annual allowance that a husband agreed to give his wife every year to cover her dress and her pocketbook expenses. So her pocketbook expenses would be little things she'd want to buy while she's out shopping, maybe money she'd want to give out to charity, money she'd give to servants as little tips or something. That would be her pocketbook money. And then, of course, again, her dress, like her hats, her scarves, her dresses, her being fancy. So yes, the husbands would literally agree to give his wife an annual allowance for clothing. And so in the Darcy-Elizabeth relationship after they're married, usually his house steward or whoever is directing his finances would literally give Elizabeth money so that she could go clothes shopping. Now you might ask, why is this a thing? Well, basically, wives did not want to have to be in the humiliating situation of constantly going to ask the husband for money every time she wanted to go to the dressmakers. In fact, the Rights and Liabilities of Husband and Wife, put out in 1849, says, "The object, in short, of pin money is to enable the wife, without constantly appealing to her husband, to attire and deck herself in a style corresponding with his position in the world." So we see two important things. Again, one, she doesn't have to constantly ask him for money, but two, the amount of pin money that would be decided upon was relative to the husband's station in life. And that is why we see Mrs. Bennet connecting this concept of Elizabeth having a lot of pin money with the fact that Mr. Darcy is rich. Because essentially the way a wife dressed reflected on the wealth of her husband. So a husband would want to make sure his wife had enough pin money so that she could essentially look rich and wealthy in front of everybody. In fact, it was even debated at the time of whether a wife could actively refuse to use her pin money. One judge said that essentially it was her job to look fancy if her husband was giving her enough money, where another judge was like, well, I guess technically it's hers, so she can save it all up and wear rags if she wants to, which would be sad, but that's her right. So this is an issue that was debated in the era. The next major thing a marriage settlement would want to cover is what would happen if the husband died before the wife. Basically, how is she going to be financially provided for? Now, this is a very interesting one because under English common law, a widow would be entitled to have the income off of 1/3 of her dead husband's estate. So, for example, if Mr. Darcy died, Elizabeth would be getting 1/3 of the income off of his estate, which, of course, let's just go with the 10,000 here, it would be about 3,333 a year that Elizabeth would be getting. But what's super interesting is that is under common law. Now remember, these marriage settlements are designed to prevent common law from taking effect because it's protecting the wife's interests. But when it comes to when she's a widow, usually what it's protecting is the husband's interest. A lot of widows in the marriage settlements were agreeing to receive less money than that 1/3. So for example, in a marriage settlement, maybe Elizabeth's only going to get £1,000 a year after Mr. Darcy dies, which would be less than what she would be entitled to under common law. But that would be what she's agreeing to under the marriage settlement. Now, of course, one of the reasons for this is because a widow getting 1/3 off the estate is going to significantly cut into the income of whoever inherits the estate after it. And of course, in an ideal situation, that would be her son, and she would also be provided for that way too. So really on this section, the widow would be being paid out annually whatever was agreed upon in the marriage settlement. And of course, an important clause in all marriage settlements was that everyone had to like this video. It was like, if you are in this marriage settlement, you must like Ellie Dashwood's video. Otherwise, I don't know what will happen. Nothing will really happen, but I would love it if you guys did like this video. Thank you so much. Okay, next up, a major section of the marriage settlement would also be dealing with any children that the couple might possibly have. So if you've seen my videos about does Captain Wentworth really buy Kellynch and why is Mr. Collins inheriting Longbourn, then you know that usually the eldest son was going to inherit the bulk of wealth in a family. However, they did care about any other potential children. And so a marriage settlement would specify for the younger sons of the family and also daughters how much money they would be getting. In fact, let's look at this quote from Pride and Prejudice where we learn about Mr. and Mrs. Bennet's marriage settlement and what it has to say about this. It says, £5,000 was settled by marriage articles on Mrs. Bennet and the children. But in what proportions it should be divided amongst the latter depended on the will of the parents. So here we see the Bennet's marriage settlement specified £5,000 was going to go to their future children. And of course, their future children were 5 daughters. Thereby, that's where we get this £1,000 apiece, or they're equally dividing up this £5,000 that was specified for them in their parents' marriage settlement. Now, did you notice the point where it said that in what proportions it should be divided amongst the latter depended on the will of the parents? So basically, in their marriage settlement, the Bennets had the ability to disinherit some of their children. For example, with Lydia, if they had wanted to, they could have said, hey, you ran away with Wickham, no money for you. Of course, they did not do that, and we're going to be talking about Lydia's marriage settlement in a little bit. But some parents in their marriage settlements left the opportunity open for them to disinherit some of their younger sons and their daughters. But not all marriage settlements did. I feel like a great example of this would be Henry Tilney in Northanger Abbey. So at the end of Northanger Abbey, Henry Tilney is like, I don't care, Dad. I'm in love with Catherine. I'll marry her anyway without your consent. One of the reasons Henry can be so confident in this course is the fact that his parents' marriage settlement is ensuring that he's going to inherit the fortune he's entitled to. His father does not have the ability to disinherit him at this point in time. In fact, let's look at a quote from Northanger Abbey for this. Speaking of General Tilney, it says, of a very considerable fortune, his son, Henry Tilney, was by marriage settlements eventually secure. So we see there, like, it is secure. The general does not have the option to disinherit him because of the marriage settlement. Now, of course, while the marriage settlement would specify a certain amount that the daughters of a family or the younger sons were entitled to, the father and the family could also always save extra money and give them more than the marriage settlement required, which is something, again, Mr. Bennet could have done. However, the marriage settlement was like the bare minimum. It's like you have to at least give them this. Which takes us to another important point, which is at what point do these portions and fortunes and dowries become available? And that is also specified in the parents' marriage settlement. Different settlements specified different things. A daughter or younger son's portion could become payable when they turn 21 years old, or possibly when their mother dies, or when both of their parents die. It depends on the situation. So another thing that we see happening, for example, in Sense and Sensibility, is that the Dashwood sisters' older brother inherits half of his mother's fortune when he's 21 years old, and he inherits the other half when his father dies, because more than likely his father was enjoying the interest off of that other half of the fortune for the rest of his life. Now again, you may ask, what about those oldest sons? Well, as we've seen in setting up a strict settlement, usually the oldest son was already guaranteed to inherit the estate or the bulk of the wealth of a family, so he was usually dealt with separately from the younger sons and daughters. Now, just a note about strict settlements that create entails versus marriage settlements that create all of the facets we've been looking at here today is that they could be combined, they could overlap, they could be set up completely separately at different times. It really all depended on the individual situation and what the current needs of the family were at the moment. Basically, like all legal stuff, it got super complex. So as we've seen, these marriage settlements are really there to protect the bride going into a marriage, protect her money, protect her if she becomes a widow, protect and provide for any future children she has. And the thing is, too, we have to remember is that these marriage settlements needed to be signed before the wedding in order to protect it going into marriage, because if it's left unprotected by a marriage settlement, the second she gets married, the husband owns everything. And that is where we get into the issues of seducing heiresses, trying to get them to run away to Scotland with scoundrels, and that's why Wickham wants Georgiana, Darcy, in Pride and Prejudice to run away to Scotland with him. Because if he can get her married without her family, without them signing a marriage settlement, he will get all of her money. So heiresses had two very real issues they had to deal with in the time. Having guys try to seduce them to Scotland, and also having guys kidnap them. So let's talk about kidnapping heiresses for a second. Its legal term was forcible abduction and marriage. But in common everyday speech, most people called it stealing an heiress. Stealing an heiress was a felony. But in order to get convicted of stealing an heiress, you had to meet 3 requirements. Number 1, the girl had to be an heiress. She had to have substantial money, land, or the prospects of having substantial land or money. Like if she was obviously going to be the next heiress of her parents' estate, that qualifies. The second thing is you would have to steal her. You'd have to forcibly take her without her consent, or you would have to forcibly marry her without her consent. So one of those things would have to be there to meet the stealing qualification. The third thing that would be required is that you would have to be stealing her because you wanted her money. It was specifically financially motivated. So if you're like, oh no, I'm just madly in love with her, that's why I kidnapped her to Gretna Green. Well, first of all, that would be incredibly creepy, but it would not meet the requirements for stealing an heiress. You would just get it on abduction, not forcible abduction and marriage. Those are different crimes. Anyway, this was a real crime that literally happened, and a famous example of it was when a Miss Taylor got abducted by Edward and William Wakefield. They literally abducted this girl from her boarding school. She was 15 years old. She was an only child. She was an heiress to her father's fortune that he made in trade. And they did this in a very con artist way. They lied to her. At first, they told her, oh, you're coming with us because your mom's sick. Next thing you know, oh no, your dad is going bankrupt, but he's agreed to let you marry me, and then I'll give him the money he needs. And pretty soon, this 15-year-old girl is married to this guy and in France before she knows what happened. So another random fact about this girl is she was recovered. The man signed a statement saying that they had never slept together yet. And she eventually went on to marry the owner of Lyme Park, which played Pemberley in Pride and Prejudice 1995. So whenever you see Pemberley in Pride and Prejudice 1995, no, one of the mistresses of that house was a girl who was stolen once. Now, let's talk about one of the famous seducers, Wickham, and his marriage to Lydia and their marriage settlement. The most ironic thing is because Lydia did not actually get married at Gretna Green, and because she didn't get married before Darcy discovered them, she ended up better off financially because Darcy came in and her uncle Mr. Gardner came in and they negotiated a marriage settlement for her before she married. In fact, that letter that Mr. Gardner sends to Mr. Bennet after Lydia is discovered talks so much about the marriage settlement. It says, I have seen them both. They are not married, nor can I find there was any intention of being so. But if you are willing to perform the engagements which I have ventured to make on your side, I hope it will not be long before they are. So here Mr. Gardner is saying, like, yes, we are negotiating it. I'm making engagements on your family's side. All that is required of you is to assure your daughter, by settlement, her equal share of the £5,000 secured among your children after the decease of yourself and my sister. So here it's saying that Mr. Bennet's agreeing to not cut Lydia out of the inheritance. She's going to get that £1,000. But that £1,000 is going to be specified in Lydia's marriage settlement that's getting set up, so it'll be protected. And moreover, to enter into an engagement of allowing her, during your life, £100 per annum. So Mr. Bennet is also agreeing that he's going to pay £100 every year as part of Lydia's marriage settlement. Now, the rest of Mr. Gardner's letter talks about how there's more money being settled on Lydia and how Mr. Wickham's debts are being paid. And of course, Mr. Bennet thinks that Mr. Gardner is paying that himself, but we discover later that it's really Mr. Darcy who's adding more money into Lydia's marriage settlement. In fact, Mrs. Gardner tells Elizabeth about how much Darcy's spending on Lydia. It says, Mr. Wickham's debts are to be paid, amounting, I believe, to considerably more than £1,000. Another 1,000 in addition to her own settled upon her, and his commission purchased. So what's really interesting about this is we see Mr. Darcy almost acting as both families in this marriage. He's backing up Wickham's side with money by paying off his debts and buying him a commission, which buying a commission in the military or helping him become an officer in the military is a provision families would usually provide to their younger sons. So Darcy is almost treating Wickham like a younger brother in his family by what he's paying for him. Meanwhile, on Lydia's side, he adds another £1,000 on. So Lydia goes in with double the amount, instead of £1,000, £2,000 into this marriage. I just think it's so fascinating that Darcy's essentially playing both families' roles in this negotiation. So really ironically, Lydia ends up in a better financial position because she tried to run away to Gretna Green but then ended up shacking up with a guy in London. That's not how life is supposed to work, but that's how it worked out for Lydia. Anyway, to sum all of this up, what were marriage settlements? Well, they were important legal contracts that were drawn up before a wedding that specified how a woman's money could be used and also how a man's money could be used to provide for the family, the wife, future children, the wife if she becomes a widow, and all of those particulars. So let me know in the comments below if you got engaged in the Regency era and you were so in love, but then your parents got in a fight over the marriage settlement and they're like, this is not happening. Would you run away and elope anyway? Would you be like, okay, our parents said we have to break up because they can't come to contract terms, but we're gonna elope to Gretna Green anyway, because it's love? Or would you be like, oh, that's sad that the marriage settlement didn't work out. I guess I'll look for somebody new now. These are the deep questions of Regency life. Anyway, my name is Ellie Dashwood, and this is my channel where we talk about history and literature. And if you like either of those things, please subscribe and keep having an awesome day because you're awesome.